It's in the last 20 years that you've seen that yoga has suddenly taken on a different tangent altogether. India has had a phenomenal legacy when it comes to strength training. So I've grown up in a family that's practically been surrounded by everything army. The two strongest, fittest communities, irrespective of the country, is going to be the farming community and the military. Whatever's portrayed, it just makes army families look abnormal. We aren't. Everything is going on, and suddenly, the moment the bugle goes on, every person in your eye line is standing still.
Yeah.
Not a soul moves till that drill is finished, right? For me, fitness wasn't hitting the gym. I've barely ever hit a gym in my life. I was diagnosed with a condition known as brachial neuritis, and my mind kept wandering to traditional Indian equipment. 3 months of practicing those movements, I got all my sensation, all my motor function strength back, what I hadn't got in 6 years. Why is it that this hasn't exploded the way yoga has? So I wanted to first find answers to that. I perhaps started this story, but I'm not going to be the one who's going to finish this story. The story shouldn't finish. It needs to continuously evolve.
3, 2, 1,
Go confidently in the direction of your dreams. Live the life you have imagined.
And the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work.
Courage is not doing things in the absence of fear. Courage is doing things despite the fear.
Growth comes from consistent action.
And you're realizing, hey, I'm not the only one with these problems.
Welcome everyone to the latest episode of the BYOB podcast. I'm so excited to have Rishabh here with us today, who is going to bring back the OG Indian workout. Thanks so much for making the time to be here today.
Thank you so much for having me here. I love the fact that you've said it's the OG Indian workout, because it is the OG Indian workout. As I keep saying that India is known when it comes to physical culture by its greatest export, which has been yoga. And it's phenomenal to see how every single country has adopted yoga now. But that change, if you observe, has happened in the last about 2 decades. Right? I mean, yoga has existed prior to that as well. But it's in the last 20 years that you've seen that yoga has suddenly taken on a different tangent altogether. And there's a reason why that's happened as well, right? Because somewhere, some people decided to change things around. They did things which made yoga accessible. It made it approachable. It broke down a lot of the myths and barriers. And then suddenly you had people who weren't just associating with yoga for a cultural reference or a spiritual reference. Everybody goes into it for their own reason, because those reasons exist and they've been made open. Likewise, India has had a phenomenal legacy when it comes to strength training, but that doesn't get spoken of that much, right? If you know, Great Gama, one of the greatest wrestlers to have lived, came from our country. India has had a phenomenal culture when it comes to kushti and wrestling and all that, and all of that involved strength training to another level. But apart from smaller circles, it is not known as much and it doesn't get spoken of that much. But that should not be the reason why we shouldn't be doing it, right? So I felt that this is a great opportunity and a responsibility that we bring it back with the same logic that we need to change a few things around, right? And marry it with modern day strength and conditioning so that it can be made more accessible for people. And that's how Tagda Raho was born. And I'll say thank you again for mentioning it as the OG Indian workout, because it certainly is.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. And I totally agree with you. We've seen so much of yoga being exported, but that's not the only Indian export that should be going out across the world. So it's really exciting that we've got something new in the fitness world that you've brought to us, and you're looking to branch out as well. I know you have had a little bit of an army upbringing and a start, and so I'm very curious about that. If you can tell us a little bit more about that upbringing and what life was like growing up in an army house, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned it, because the name of the brand, Tagda Raho, itself is inspired by a salutation that's used in the Assam regiment of the Indian Army. I've grown up, my grandfather was in the Air Force, my father was in the Army.
Wow.
So I've grown up in a family that's practically been surrounded by everything army or defense. So growing up, when I would hear this term and this salutation, Tagda Raho, because men and women of Assam regiment, they would not meet each other and say good morning, good evening. It's Tagda Raho, So it just charges you up.
Yeah.
So it stayed with me. And the moment I got an opportunity when I decided to start this, I felt that what better can define an Indian workout experience than saying Tagda Raho, So that's how it began. But yeah, the army experience taught me a lot more than just giving me the name. It's a phenomenal experience because growing up, I was surrounded by people who were setting benchmarks for fitness across the country, and they were doing it for a living, right? I have always believed that no matter which country you go to, the two strongest, fittest communities, irrespective of the country, is going to be the farming community and the military, right? For obvious reasons. You don't have to look beyond them to see what fitness requires, and those are the benchmarks that I've grown up with, and that is what I've also tried to incorporate in the program that we've built, right? To keep it functional, to keep it relevant, so that it helps you in day-to-day life, right? Not purely for aesthetics. That's important as well. If somebody is into aesthetics, nothing wrong in that. But my goal is to help people live a life, empower them to live a life they want to live. They shouldn't be afraid to try things physically because they're not sure whether they can do it. Achieve that level of fitness. And that was something I learned being in the army environment, because the army was either fighting a war or they were preparing for one. There was no in between, right? So training was always on. So that's how I've grown up and I've seen things.
And before we get into the nuts and bolts of the business and how you're tackling that entrepreneurial journey, I'd love to know a little bit more about living and being brought up in an army household, because I have a very, and I'm going to admit it here, I have a very stereotypical image of what an army family looks like, because I have grown up on Bollywood. And so I have a very specific picture of what I think life looks like. So I don't know whether you're going to reinforce that or break that completely, but could you share a little bit about what life is like?
I think no matter who you speak to in real life when they come from an army background, some of those stereotypes will be broken, because whatever's portrayed, it just makes army families look abnormal. We aren't, right? We aren't abnormal. It's normal families. There are differences, however, because we are exposed to very different environments. One of them being the constant requirement to move. And everybody knows that. Any army kid would introduce themselves, say, I've lived here, I've lived here. That's how have you stayed in this camp? Have you stayed in this camp? And that's how we connect. Okay, we might have a common friend like this, right? Now it has its positives and negatives. The positive is obvious, that it allows you to blend into any environment you're pushed into. It allows you to adapt quickly, right? It allows you to deal with uncomfortable situations because it was fairly regular for you, right? At the same time, the negatives, I would say, are that, like in my case personally, I was on the move every year or two. So by the time you start making a close friend, you're going to leave. Or your friend's going to leave, right? So there was no constant. And then you would go to a new station, you start that process again, start blending in. And again, by the time you're about to set in, either they'll move or you'll move, right? So those are things that prepare you well, I think, both positives and negatives. They prepare you well. And apart from that, like I said, one of the most important things was, when you're living in smaller cantonments, there are regiments that are around you, and they all have the same time. They'll start their physical training in the morning at 5. There's a bugle that goes up because the flag is raised every day. So literally the whole cantonment knows exactly, okay, it must be 5 a.m. bugle's going, right? And then in the evening, at the general officer's house, the flag was lowered, right? And again, there was a bugle, and the entire station at that time, when the bugle was being played, had to be in attention. The entire cantonment, if you could hear the bugle, not a soul would move.
Wow.
So just imagine that. For me, those visuals are still very fresh, right? That everything is going on, and suddenly the moment the bugle goes on, every person in your eye line is standing still.
Yeah.
Not a soul moves till that drill is finished, right? So that teaches you a lot, right? Talking about community building, what better example can I give? That just one call and the entire... So consider a cantonment to be a small city. Entire city standing still.
Yeah, that seems nuts.
Right? So that is my understanding of community. And that is what I'm trying to build into our community of Tagda Raho as well. Not just the people who train offline with us, but even online, right? Sure. That there's more to community than just a name. You know, you share ethics, you share a way of life, right? And those are things I've learned from being in the army background.
Wonderful. And I know that coming to Tagda Raho and you starting it out, if I've got it right, there was a little bit of a personal experience as well that got you into saying, okay, we've got to start this as well. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Give us some color about how that actually affected you and how it led to Tagda Raho.
Absolutely. So, my journey into fitness is not like I wasn't the fittest kid. Right? I was actually quite the roly polies, as they used
Well,
to
you've
call
done
it.
remarkably well.
Thank you. And coming from a Punjabi family, wherever you knew you weren't the fittest, but you were given this caveat, baby fat hai, chala jayega, But there was a time when you realized ki nahi gaya. It hasn't gone anywhere. I need to do something about it, right? So my journey in fitness began quite late. But when it did, and I am slightly obsessive by nature, I either like things or I don't. And when I did get into it, I got obsessed with it. And for me, fitness wasn't hitting the gym. I've barely ever hit a gym in my life. Barely, right? If I have to put the number of days together, it wouldn't cross 2 months of my life.
Okay.
The number of days that I've actually spent in a gym. Nothing against the gym, it just wasn't something that I enjoyed, right?
Sure.
But for me, fitness was, like I said, being able to do things I love doing. I loved the outdoors, right? I got into cycling, thanks to a friend of mine. And when I got into cycling, I got into ultra endurance cycling because of, like I said, I really liked it.
Sure.
So I've cycled the length of the country. I've cycled the entire continent of Europe. So that was the level of ultra endurance.
Sorry,
events.
I have to pause you here straight away. You cycled all of Europe, did you just say?
Yeah, I cycled.
What does
about
that
10.
mean?
So I was part of a race that's called the Transcontinental Race. I was
Okay.
the first Indian to ever participate in that race.
Wow.
And it's a self-supported race. Why the race actually began was because just like the Tour de France, which began in its initial days as an adventure race, you were not allowed any support. You were not allowed a crew that would tail you through the journey. It was an all-out adventure race, right? But that somewhere died out because today you've got crews, like riders, in that tournament would have cars behind them with their spare bikes and everything. Fine,
Right.
Tour de France requires a completely different level of effort. But there's a side of the world which still wants to do that adventure racing,
old
which
school
felt
stuff.
that, okay, I have to do everything on my own, right? Which meant I have to create my own navigation. And I hadn't been to Europe. The only place I had been to was UK for a brief period, but I had never been to Europe. So creating my own map was very difficult. And I remember sitting in office at 2, 3 in the morning every night, connecting 2 screens and using Google Earth to see where can I go, because you are given 4 or 5 points
Right.
across 10 to 12 countries that these are mandatory. You have to cross these to
Okay.
stamp a brevet card that you get.
So you don't have to take a particular route. You just have to cross that.
Everybody there were 200 of us. We all had different routes.
Right.
So when on the start of the race, I saw 200 tail lights blinking.
Yeah.
After 1 hour, I saw about 100. After 2 hours, about 50, and then I didn't see anything.
Okay,
right?
that sounds terrifying.
Yeah.
But,
So,
okay.
and the race begins at night. It begins at 10 at night, right? So for somebody who's not familiar with the environment there, and that's why they do it. That's why they create it at 10 at night, right? That race was a self-supported race. I had to navigate on my own, find your own place to sleep, if at all you were sleeping. We were cycling about 18-20 hours average every day. And your own food, you're not allowed to take any help from a third party. You can be disqualified if you're
Right.
found taking anything from a third party, right? So that's the kind of race it was. So that's the level of obsession I had with riding. But what had happened was, between these 2 extreme events, which was the India trip and this, I was diagnosed with a condition known as brachial neuritis. It's a very rare condition. Firstly, it took multiple visits to multiple different hospitals to even figure out, because initially nobody was able to figure out. So I lost sensation, 70% motor function, everything. My arm would only move this much. It could not move beyond. So if I had to keep it here, I had to lift it with the other arm. And
Right.
that's how bad it was.
Sorry, how old were you when
This happened
diagnosis came?
2012, 13.
Okay,
Right? I'm 36 now.
got it.
So I couldn't even lift a 5 rupee coin with my left hand. That's how bad it had become. And when we found out, okay, this is the pinpoint diagnosis, then the options that I was given were, okay, you continue physiotherapy with the hope that it will work.
Right.
And I was doing it, wasn't working. Or reconstructive surgery, but with a less than 40% chance of success. And the surgery is supposed to happen here, right? This is your brachial plexus region. That's
Right.
where the surgery happens. So I thought, okay, I'm hardly like 24, 25.
Yeah.
This is not something I want to do with less than 40% chance.
Yeah.
What if jitna hai, that also goes, you know.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
was like, okay, hold on, I'm not going to do this. Let's see. But I did not find anything, and I honestly, I believe that humans are also creature of habit, right? So you once you've gotten used to something, you start living normally, right?
Right.
And that was the sad part, because I had gotten so used to just doing this all the time that I began living my life normally and forgetting that, okay, I have 1.5 arms, literally. But then there again came a point where it began irritating me, because I was not able to do half the things that I would in a jiffy, right? And then I started, this was around COVID when I was picking up strength and conditioning, I was studying. And my mind kept wandering to traditional Indian equipment, right? And I'll give you the reason why. Now, this is commonly in India, it's known as the Gada, right? In the West now, it's known as the mace. But if you observe this, the most beautiful part of this, when I say in terms of fitness, is that the entire weight is stacked on one side. If I give you a barbell or a dumbbell, there's an equal weight on either side,
Correct,
right?
yeah.
Very sequenced and choreographed.
Yeah.
But to have this becomes an extension of my body, right? This is an extension of my body. So I'm not just merely lifting it, I'm swinging this. So the kind of stimulation that it gives to my body, the kind of fibers it recruits to swing this, and this is the lightest, right? 2 kgs. But the kind of fibers and muscles that my body needs to activate and recruit to move this, I felt, my gut feeling told me something is going to give. So I decided to source one, which was very difficult because this is so forgotten that there were no brands selling it. I had to find some carpenter who can make it for me. And then I made it finally. And then I thought, okay, now let's learn it. There's hardly anybody there to teach you. And then finally, when I did understand, okay, there were only 3 movements available, 3 to 4, which were practiced in the gardis and akhadas across India. But they were only 3 or 4 because they were all focused on wrestling. So they knew, okay, 3 movements is what we need to condition our shoulders and our upper body.
Got it.
Fair enough. That's what they were practicing. But I needed more for my arm to recover. I needed more. So I started creating. I started applying what I was studying in strength and conditioning, and I started applying it to the physics and the biomechanics of it.
Yeah.
And then I came up with 50, 60 different movements. And in 3 months of practicing those movements, I got all my sensation, all my motor function strength back, what I hadn't got in 6 years.
Yeah, that's insane.
That is when I knew that this equipment, this form of training has so much more to offer to the world. And I've been blessed that I've gotten this opportunity to, 1, recover, and 2, be able to take this to the world, right? It's something I love doing. It's fitness, so why not? And that's how the journey began.
Wow. So can you tell me, firstly, I'm really glad you didn't just smack me on the face with that because I was scared for a second. But can you tell me a little bit about, so when this started working for you, and you said, like you said here, you wanted to take it to the world and there's so much more to offer. How long did it take you to go from having the intention of, I should take it to the world, to putting it into action and saying, let's go, let's start this? How long was that period?
4 weeks.
Wow. Okay, that's really quick. Because I feel like most people just have it in their mind for like weeks and months and years before they actually get acting.
Like I said, I get obsessed if I like something, and then I just have to do it, right? So when I was sure that, okay, this is something that has to be done, then it was about just getting on with things. What I did do was that I also started questioning as to, okay, it's not like I have discovered this equipment. It's existed way longer than I have, right? I haven't discovered the equipment. Why is it that this hasn't exploded the way yoga has? So I wanted to first find answers to that. One of the things I found and felt was that there was no innovation done when it comes to the equipment. It is still the way it was 1,000 years ago, right? Unfortunately, I don't have that with me right now. But what I did was I made it modular. So this is like another piece of equipment. What I've done is to cater to and make it relevant to modern day life. I came up with a design change where I can remove the grip, I can attach a new grip, I can shift the weight, I can reduce, add weight, right?
Got it.
So that is what I first did. Before I launched anything, I first decided to modify the equipment to see, because in today's day and age where people are not living in palatial houses anymore, the spaces have gotten smaller, people are traveling more often, they need things to move with them when they're traveling. I felt, okay, so all my equipment can fit into a bag,
Right.
all of the equipment, right? And that's how we began, and the government of India has given us a patent on it.
Wow, that's fantastic.
So that's how we first began. That's how we introduced the equipment. And Then came the movements part of it, because I knew, like I struggled, 9 out of 10 people who are picking up the equipment will not know what to do with it, right?
Yeah.
So that's where the training started, and it started only online first. The offline spaces are fairly recent.
I also want to know a little bit about your journey as an entrepreneur. So can you tell me about the early days? Because here's what I'm imagining. I'm imagining you're super excited, super passionate about the space. It's so new and exciting. It's something that was 1,000 years ago. You're creating it new, so it's exciting. People must be curious, and you might have heard a lot of, "Ooh, that's really interesting." But at the same time, I'm guessing there's a huge challenge in trying to create something that's new, because you have to educate so many people. So can you tell me about, I guess, the more tricky parts in the early stages of your journey? What was tricky about it? How did you process it? How did you move forward from there?
It's a fantastic question. I think the tricky part in terms of what I felt in the beginning, some of it still continues, right? Now, so I wouldn't say that I've created something completely new, right? I have modified something, reintroduced something. The movements might be new. But since it's 1,000-year-old, it comes with its challenge, because there is a stereotype also that's associated with it, that this is only for wrestlers.
Yeah.
I've only seen wrestlers and pehlwans doing this, right? Women have never been seen doing it. So these are barriers that I had to first break. Before I could, my job was to make this cool, hip, chic, accessible, approachable, relevant, right? Not a cult. This shouldn't be cultish, because that's not why this has benefits. If it becomes cultish, there's no point.
It's going to alienate so many people.
So it was already coming from that space, right? Because you've only seen it in corners, you've only seen it in some films. You've got every Indian sees this and knows, okay, I have some association with this.
Dangal.
Yeah.
That's my association.
But never experienced it.
Yeah.
And I've already made up my mind, okay, this is in some village there, it's only for pehlwans or wrestlers, right? So that's the first barrier that I had to break. And coming from a background where I was into, say, cycling or other forms of sports, I knew that this had massive application to different sports as well, right? So I knew, and I felt that getting an athlete or a coach to buy into this program will be my first challenge. If they start doing it, it will automatically start breaking that stereotype, okay, that this is not only meant for wrestling, can be used for other things as well. Second, which is one of the most important things for me, was to get women to do it.
Yeah.
Right? Because when this existed in its most historical sort of format, women were not seen using it, right? So again, because the questions I began getting initially were, can women do it? My response would be, why even asking me? Obviously you can, but then they obviously have certain stereotypes. So you need to break it down for them that of course you can use it, right? Don't be intimidated by it. My biggest break came in when Rahul Dravid at that time, Sir Rahul Dravid as I call him, he was heading NCA, BCCI over here.
Yeah.
He saw what we were doing. He quite liked it. He said, I can see a direct application to the game. Why don't you come to the National Cricket Academy, give a demonstration to the staff?
Wow.
So there, I knew that instant, I knew that, okay, this is going to be your chance. If India's biggest sport accepts you, you've taken a much bigger leap than your first step to break that stereotype down. And when I did go and present it there, I gave a demonstration there, they all loved it. I personally trained the strength and conditioning staff at National Cricket Academy, taught them the movements. They use some of our equipment there now.
Wow.
And when that started getting spoken of, that barrier started to go down. Then I was again lucky that I had opinion leaders like Milan Soman, who organically just reached out on Instagram, said, I want to buy a couple of these. Can you please send it over? And then he posted about it. And he's somebody people look up to when it comes to fitness, right? That helped me break the stereotype again. Then I had Mr. IPL, Suresh Raina. He's using our equipment, right? And all of these are not paid PR or anything. These are genuine customers who've reached out to us saying, I want to do this, right? Previous season, our team trained the Lucknow Super Giants in IPL. That gave me the opportunity to train legends like Jonty Rhodes. Jonty Rhodes, to my mind, is the guy who redefined fitness and athleticism in cricket.
Yeah.
There's an era before Jonty and there's an era after Jonty, right? You did not see cricketers flying around on the field before Jaunty Rhodes. So I knew that, okay, if Jaunty Rhodes likes this and understands what I'm doing, there again is the next step to break that barrier down. And he loved it. He absolutely loved it. He said, this is phenomenal. This is what the world of sport needs, because the movements are dynamic.
Right.
They're not linear. They're not just getting people to sit and push things around. You know, they're far more relevant in the field. So it's a beautiful addition to whatever else people are following in different sports, right? So that, when you're talking about barriers, that still exists. That still is one of my biggest barriers, to be able to tell people that this is more than what you have in mind. Just come and experience it once, right? So that's the biggest barrier that I faced.
And what about the biggest barrier on the personal journey as an entrepreneur? So you've told me, and I'm quite clear about, for Tagda Raho, this is the biggest barrier. And as the founder, you're the one who has to break it. But on this journey of breaking this barrier, building a business, has there been any challenges on the personal front that you've had to contend with? And what are the nature of those?
Yeah, I think there are. You can't say that there aren't. I mean, there are the obvious ones of capital and, you know, of managing your working capital if you're not a company that's raised money, right? But apart from that, I think it's a journey, right? Everybody keeps saying it, but when I say a journey, it's a journey every day.
Yeah.
You just have to be relentless, right? There are mornings, there are evenings where you're just in a daze, you know, like, because it feels like that Groundhog Day, you know?
Yeah.
The same as yesterday, same as day before. But then you know you have a purpose. You know why you're here, right? So, and I've heard this, what I'm just saying, I've heard so many people say it. And it wouldn't register the way it feels now, because I've experienced it, right? I'm sure I'm not the first person saying this to you, that it's a journey. Some days get very challenging, right? I'm not the first person saying it. So many people have experienced it. But yes, when you are in those shoes yourself, you realize, and that's when you also understand how strong your purpose is. Because if it isn't, and if you're doing it purely because it feels like this can be the next cool thing, then you're gonna break. You are going to break, because challenges, no matter how good things are going, challenges will constantly be thrown at you, right? So you just have to either chin up, face the music, dance your way around it, or hunch. And either decide to go back or continue at a slow pace. So it's up to you, your journey, your pace, you decide, right? So there are definitely challenges on the personal front as well.
Do you find yourself subconsciously or consciously taking the learnings of what you saw at those cantonments around you and how the army operated and your learnings from there into entrepreneurship in your journey? Is it conscious, subconscious? What's happening with that? Because when you talked about the experience with the army and you talked about things are constantly changing, you constantly have to adapt. And to me, and I'm obsessed with entrepreneurship, so all I could hear was, this is exactly what an entrepreneur's journey is. So do you find that as well?
It's both subconscious and conscious, and I'll give you a few reasons. I'll give you a very beautiful example in terms of how the army also has something where you're literally raising a new company, right? There are regiments in the army. There's a Jat regiment, there's a Madras regiment, Punjab regiment. Within that, there are battalions, right? Now, there's a new battalion that has to be raised, right? So if, for example, the Punjab regiment has 10 battalions, the 11th battalion has to be raised.
Right.
There are officers who are selected. They'll be sent to a new location with a certain given resources. You have this much, these many men right now with you. You have to raise a new battalion with 700 men or above, right? Now you tell me a difference between that and right? And they are obviously doing it at where the stakes are very different, right? So you see that happening. That okay, there are 7, 8, 10 guys who've gone and they've raised a new battalion. What are the challenges that they are facing, right? From some part in perhaps Maharashtra, they've been sent to some part in the Northeast. Now culture is completely different, language completely different. They're still doing it, right? So therein is the direct comparison in terms of the journey and things that I've seen there versus an entrepreneur's, right? But at the same time, I do take a lot of other things as well, which happen in cantonments. Like I said, you know, the very fact that the example I gave you of that the whole cantonment would stand at attention because the flag is going down. So for me, community building starts from, not starts, but it means a lot more to me. It's much deeper for me than just a name, right?
Sure.
And then there are other things. There are so many in the army. There's a drill for everything. To wear your shoes, to remove your shoes. There's a drill for everything, right? So I take from all of those things. And see, okay, where can I use this? Where can I use this to bring people together? Because no organization brings people together like the army does, right? So these are only positives that I could take from there, and I continue to do that.
So where can you tell us the almost like the state of play with Tagda Raho right now? So I can see these beautiful products. I think just before we got into this conversation in the interview, you talked about physical locations that you are starting. So can you tell me all the different things Tagda Raho is doing and how you're managing each of those?
Right. So currently there are three things primarily. One is our equipment, which is sold online. We also have tutorials that people download, buy from us online. Right?
Okay.
These are pre-recorded. People can use it at their own
Of
pace.
how to use the equipment?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
got it.
The people can use it at their own pace, right? There's no sort of validity to it. Right? If you don't use it in 8 weeks, it's going to run out. Take your time, right? This was the initial part of the business. But that's when I also realized that people, and this was again COVID time, right? It was very difficult to make that decision because one side felt that will the world ever be the same again?
Yeah.
Will people actually go out and train again? Because you were looking at other fitness brands, getting bombarded because of whatever was happening. But I just felt that this is Indian and I am only taking it back to Indians. And it can't just be online. They need to feel it. They need to experience it. And as Indians, we are so tactile, in terms of people.
Yeah.
We want to touch, feel, experience it, right? So again, and I'm somebody who follows the gut, right? I just felt that I have to give people a space for them to come and experience this. That stereotype will not be broken just by being online.
Sure.
So that is when I decided to launch the first dugout. Dugout is what we call it. We don't call it a gym. Dugout is again a very military term as well. So the first one came up in Alsur, right? And it's a semi-outdoor setup. So you've got the sun, you've got the rain, you've got all of that. Part of our system when we train is also a sand pit.
Right.
Not the traditional mud pit that you see in akhadas, but this is a sand pit. There are various reasons because purely from a fitness point of view, it's part of the training happens on that because it's low impact. Second, it creates a lot more resistance, so it makes people work harder. Third, it's one of the only natural things people are going to step foot on in their day because all of us are in shoes, on floors, on carpets, and we've forgotten what earth feels like. Yeah. So one of the reasons why I also wanted it to be outdoors was because it's an element that's just gone completely missing from our lives, right? We dedicate 1 hour of one weekend to go to the park to feel the earth.
You're making me feel so bad. This is what my life is.
But that's how pathetic it sounds as well, right? That okay, why are we doing this? So at least our members, we train barefoot. Our members get to experience the feeling of being on sand every day, right? Training. And I can see them going back with a smile. They may not be able to pinpoint that, okay, that's why I'm smiling. But as a trainer, I know what is happening, right? So that is the reason why I wanted to have that offline space. Then we opened our second branch, which is in HSR layout. Mm-hmm. That's an indoor setup. I wanted to understand, I personally, and for the business, I wanted to experiment and see what works better, right? Does it even have scope indoors? Does it not?
Yeah.
So these are the two branches that we have right now. We're exploring other cities as well now. Mm-hmm. And the third side of it is certifications. We've started certifying trainers around the country and the world, in fact, with our own training program.
Okay,
right? So we've got over 60 different movements that we've created, which keep evolving as well. So we've got level 1 to level 4.
I can imagine that's a key way to institutionalize what you're building and actually make sure it, sustains, the movement sustains beyond just products. And
because
spaces.
See, if I have to do this alone, if Tagda Raho has to do it alone, it's going to take me a long time. Yeah. It's a new fitness format, but doesn't mean that I'm the only one who has to do it.
Yeah.
Right? I am not breaking the existing value chain of the fitness industry. I'm adding to it.
Sure.
I'm not breaking it down saying don't do this or don't do that. I am saying there are certain gaps. I am giving you something which fills that gap. Sure. Right? People anyway constantly looking for something new. Right? So we've got a lot of partner gyms who've sent all the trainers to us to get certified. They're providing our training program in their gym as well.
Nice.
Right? So that's the third side of it, which is education, right? And through that, I feel the name and the format, the acceptance will be much faster than what I can do alone.
Sure. You've also spoken a lot about community and why that's so important to you. And we are both very clearly aligned on that, because what we do at Jigsaw as well is try to bring a community of entrepreneurs together. I often use a lot of analogies from the fitness world to talk about what we do actually, which is instead of just working out your body, work out your mind as an entrepreneur, things like that. I'm very curious on the community front. To you, what is community? Why is it so important to you that Tagda Raho is a community, not just products and spaces and certifications? Why does that thing of community keep coming up?
I don't think I can pinpoint, honestly. It's just where I come from, right? I have not seen anything else. I've only seen a community. I have not seen anything else. No matter how remote the place is where we've stayed, there's always a community, right? So somewhere I think I'm driven by that, because one person carries the other, right? Fitness is a way of life. Fitness is not a format. Fitness is not something you do for half an hour a day or 1 hour a day. It's a way of life. And not everybody is born with the mentality of or a mindset of a Kobe Bryant or a LeBron or a Virat, right? Then there are exceptions. They've worked their way through it. But not everybody, aspires to be there. They have different aspirations. And why I bring up this point is because that's the majority of us.
Yeah.
The majority of us want to stay fit for different reasons. And our lives are such that we keep getting pulled down. So you need a community to pull you out again. Say, come, we'll do this together.
Yeah.
We'll do this together, right? So that is why community becomes important. Secondly, there's a big India story here, right? You said the OG Indian workout, right? So it's not something I'm going to do by design. It's happening by default. People are coming, trying it. So 75% of our members are women, right? Which is practically unheard of when you look at the workout that we're doing.
Yeah, it seems you smashed that stereotype in the face.
I'm glad that's happening, right? That's community, right? That is community, because now that they're there, then there are other ladies who are looking at them. They feel that place is safe, it's accessible, it's approachable, it's nothing intimidating. That's what a community does, right? That's what a community does, right? And it's a very inclusive place, right? So even though I'm saying 75% women, it's not like I have a separate batch for women or for men.
Sure.
No, everybody trains together. That's community, right? So movements are so new for people. They've never done these movements, right? So it's again, one person carries the other, right? So that's where community becomes that much more important. And to tell a story, and for the story to continue to evolve, you need a community. I perhaps started this story, but I'm not going to be the one who's going to finish this story. The story shouldn't finish. It needs to continuously evolve, right? It needs to evolve with time. It needs to evolve with people. And where does that come from? That comes from community.
Yeah.
So therein is the importance of community.
I don't think I could have put in better words anything you just said about community. So we're going to take a snippet of that and then we'll put it on our website also. Why community? Here's the answer. Thank you very much.
Like everything else, I love royalties, brother.
Okay, we've talked about a lot of deep stuff. I'm going to lighten the mood, I guess, a little bit. We have a little segment we do on the BYOB podcast called Jaldi with Jigsaw, which has not been copy-pasted from any other places that you might be thinking about.
Yeah, the first thing that's come into my mind.
But we won't talk about it because he also likes royalties. Right. Question 1. What do you think your superpower is as an entrepreneur?
Motivating people.
Okay. What's the latest show you binge-watched?
Latest show? I don't binge watch shows, but the previous one would be Peaky Blinders.
Okay, got it. What do you enjoy most about being your own boss?
Freedom and discipline.
And what is the most draining part of being your own boss?
Not to misuse that freedom. That's the most difficult part, So, because you're in an organization, you're bound by a structure, by a policy. But here, if you're defining it yourself, it's very easy to sometimes feel, I've had such a tough last 2 days, I can take it easy. You can't.
Yeah.
You just can't. Keep going.
If you weren't doing this, is there anything else you could imagine yourself doing?
Be in the army.
How do you switch off?
I don't. I think that's something I should learn to, but I don't. I can't.
Okay. How do you want to be remembered?
Somebody who contributed to the India story, contributed to taking the Indian legacy, whether it's physical or any other, to the world, the way it should be taken. I always felt that the Indian legacy, no matter what space it is in, is always represented by a Western perspective. Because some people who've taken it there probably did not understand it the way we do. Indians have not been able to tell their story the way we should be telling it. That's changing now. That's changing with a lot of things. Even the companies that you see, brands that you see that are being built, right? So I feel like I said this to someone recently, Hindustan ki kahani, hamari zubani. I don't need somebody else telling me my legacy. I will tell it.
Yeah.
I'll share it with the world.
Fantastic.
So,
Who is your biggest cheerleader?
friends, family, all of them, yeah. They've all been so supportive of everything that I've ever wanted to try. And trust me, I've wanted to try a lot of whacked out things in life, including that race, for example, right? So my friends and family have just always been so supportive, yeah. So supportive. So,
And if there was somebody else thinking about, in that 4-week window right now, thinking about starting their own thing, but not quite getting to action right now, what would you tell them?
that one, overthinking will never get you anywhere, and two, while I've said that, lack of planning will also not get you anywhere. It's okay to wing it once in a while, but unless you have a plan, and I have not been somebody who's always had a plan. I've burnt my hands, and then I've learned that okay, I wasted 30 days because I was running without a plan.
Sure.
And it's a very good friend of mine, more like a brother, Sriram. He runs Maverick and Farmer, the cafe. Like he's like a mentor to me, so he guides me a lot. And while I say that, okay, don't overthink, but at the same time, don't also always run around without a plan. There's a very thin line that divides the two, but it's this speed of decision and also having a plan.
Yeah, got it. I'm really excited you said that, because when we came up with the name Jigsaw Thinking as well, the idea was that you don't want to be overthinking, you don't want to be underthinking, you want to be building stuff together and experimenting. So very, very aligned, I think, in that way of thinking as well. Cool, fantastic. I guess one final question to wrap this up, which is one of my favorite sayings is you're always one version away from perfection. So you're always versioning up, always moving forward. So what is your next version? What is Tagda Raho's next version? What should we be expecting from you and the brand over the next year or so?
The next year or so, definitely you will see us in more locations, perhaps outside Bangalore as well. The training will also evolve to include and get into a lot of different sports. As I mentioned at the start of this, that I'm working with a golf coach now. We're creating a program for golfers together. Now, imagine an equipment like this, which according to people belong to the akhadas, now on the golf course.
Yeah, that's
incredible. Right. That's the spectrum, right? So we will continue to evolve. There's literally no sitting still here, right? It's a brand that's born out of evolution and trying to reintroduce something, and that's where we'll continuously be. We'll continuously keep evolving. Yeah.
And if people wanted to know more about Tagda Raho, where can they follow you, find out more about the brand?
So our website, tagdaraho.in. On Instagram, we are with the same name, Tagda Raho. These are 2 platforms. We have 2 branches in Bangalore. You all can drop in anytime. We'll be there. It's always been that this is not mine, this is yours, this is India's, right? And one of the statements I like to make is made in India, fit for the world, right? And it's not me who's going to take this alone. Each one of us needs to carry this legacy forward. See how magical it is. It's created some of the strongest men and women in the world. You can be a part of that as well. So
that's beautiful. Thank you. I think we'll wrap up with that very inspiring message. That means that I'll probably come and visit definitely within the next week.
Please
so
do.
thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And all the best. We're rooting for Tagda Raho and for you for sure.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. Thank you all of you. Yeah. Thank you.
So I hope you enjoyed this podcast. We're Jigsaw Thinking, home of the self-starters. If you're interested in being your own boss, head to jigsawthinking.com or drop us a DM at Jigsaw Thinking on Instagram.